I'm Hillary Allen, and this is a little live video for anyone joining. You can put in some comments in the comment sections, or this is going to be posted to the Sharman Ultra Coaching page, and you can watch it later if you have any questions or just curious about coaching in general and my coaching style. We've got some other coaches doing these live sessions throughout the year, so it's a really valuable resource. If you're looking for a coach, today was the lottery for the UTMB finals, the selection of UTMB, CCC, OCC, and MCC. So if you guys got in there and you're looking for a coach, I have run UTMB and TDS, which used to be a part of the series. I've run TDS once, I've run UTMB twice. I'm going to run it this year again. And some of my favorite races to run are the mountainous races. I've run a lot of the races in the UTMB series as well as some other mountain races that are on, like the Mute Mountain Island Ultra Trail. That's on the new trail running World Series. Basically, this ultra distance trail running series that has started this year. So I have had some questions. I kind of posted some little Q&As on my own Facebook page. Like I said, you can ask some more here, or if listening to this and it raised some questions on your own, you can reach out to us over at Sharman Ultra. You can visit our coaching page through the Facebook page here, and you can shoot us some questions there if you have any other thoughts. Okay, so because I'd like this theme to be a little bit more around some mountain ultra races, like I said, those are the races that I personally love to run, and the ones that I think I have a big specialty in training athletes to prepare for these races. So we're going to kind of start with a focus for, what's the best focus for training for UTMB? So I think a lot of athletes right now, we're planning our season, whether we've got selected for lotteries or signed up for big races that are going to be in the summer months. So that's, July and August. And it seems like it's far away, right? UTMB is the end of August, so we've got 8 months, right? But I actually think now is the perfect time to hire a coach. And right now, I live in a place where there's snow on the ground. We've actually got a pretty big winter storm here in Colorado, and so I think right now the best place to start, if you choose to get a coach, which I do think actually now is a great time, so you have enough time to build up for 100-mile mountain race. Even if you're training for a 50K or a 100-kilometer race, that's a mountain race. Those races usually take a lot of time, and so I think now is the time to start building your base. And I think it's important. You don't need to log a ton of miles, especially in the snow. It can, potentially lead to some overuse injuries. But right now is the time to build your base. So it can be, less specificity, more cross training. Like if you like to ski or do other sports, there's a lot of time spent training that you're just, logging the hours, getting your base ready so that you're nice and fit and strong. And so that when the snow starts melting and it's time to put in more running miles, that your body's ready to do that. I also think that right now, actually, it's a really good time to be in the gym. During the summer months, I think we can spend a lot of time running, and your body it's a lot of wear and tear. So now is kind of the building season. So if you have any injuries, it's a nice time to address those in the gym with your PT or with the coach. I have personally a lot of experience with that, and so making sure that your weaknesses are addressed so that you're as strong as possible before we start logging a lot of training miles. Okay, so another question that I had. So, how do you train for a trail race if you don't live by the trails? Um, so actually, this is personally, I'm very lucky because I live in Boulder, Colorado, so I could run on the trail every day. Um, but actually, you don't necessarily need that. In fact, when I first started trail running, I actually lived in Denver, Colorado. I was in graduate school, and the trails were a pretty far commute for me. And so it didn't make sense for me to run trails every day. And so the beginning of my running journey, I just ran on the roads and I did my workouts on the roads and the track. And then on the weekends, when I had more time, I commuted to the trails and I could run my long runs on the trails. And so I think a lot of athletes actually that I coach, they don't necessarily have access to trails every single day. They, with family or work, or just where they live. And so um, there's plenty of ways, and I think this is why it's an important reason to have a coach who understands that, and to be able to cater your training and make sure that it's very specific to where you live. And there's certain things that you can actually do to incorporate quote unquote trail strength into your training, even if you are running on the roads. And I do think, conversely, if you're training on the trails every day and you're getting in a lot of vert, it actually can be a good time to get a coach so that you can actually work on turnover and other things that make you faster, right? So it's a bit of push and pull. You need to kind of have a little bit of both. You can't just spend your whole time hiking on the trails. You need a little bit of turnover that can help with downhill running. There's certain exercises that you can do in the gym or even at home, on a set of stairs, to build strength, and in your ankles and in your quads to prepare yourself for downhill running. There's plenty of things that you can do, and thankfully I have a lot of experience working with PTs personally and different athletes who don't live on the trails to be able to have a specific training program that'll actually make you strong for a mountain 100, even if all of your miles aren't on trails. Um, Ooh, this is a great question. And maybe you can tell because I have my bikes behind me. So I use cross training on my bike. And so how does this help me, uh, and how and why should anyone else incorporate it? So I like to, whenever I start working with an athlete, I always ask them, what other sports do you want to do? Do you like doing other sports, cross training? And if so, what are they? Right, common for where I live is skiing, and cycling. Um, and also asking, okay, do you want to race? Do you want to be competitive on, do you want to do skimo racing or, skate, like Nordic racing or bike racing, right? So there's a difference between if an athlete just likes to do other things or if they want to race, and there's different ways that you can incorporate that. If you want to race, it's a matter of, binning your A bike races and your A running races, being able to ramp up the specificity for a bike race versus a running race at different times of year. They all play into each other, thankfully, because there's a lot of endurance based, and there's some different things that you can use to kind of to sharpen your anaerobic or your aerobic engine, based on what you're doing. If it's an athlete, I think that is injury prone, cross training is a really good tool. Also, athletes who are a bit older, and can't, necessarily do a bunch of speed work running, the bike is a really good tool for that, to be able to kind of get in these different zones, but have it be relatively low impact. And it's also builds strength because it's a slightly different, uh, set of muscle groups that you're using and how you, like muscle tension, right? That you're kind of putting on the pedals or, stuff that you're using, cross country racing or skimo racing. And so, and if it's an athlete that, is time crunched, maybe we'll use cross training more strategically, like a different workouts, like as another form of intensity, with lowering the chances of being injured. And if it's someone that just likes to do a bunch of volume, it could be a safe way to add in a little bit more a little bit more volume if you're training for a really long race. One of my favorite things to do personally in my training is like a long training day. I ride my bike to a trail, do a trail run, and then ride my bike back. That can be a really like a big quality day. A lot of time in zone 2, zone 3, and but without doing too much pounding, right? It's not. I don't have to. Spend 10 hours running. I can do a 10-hour training day without actually running the whole time. So there's some little hacks in there that can actually be pretty useful. And I personally love to do it in my training. I've been doing it for the past 5 years, racing on a bike and running. And so I've learned a lot through my own journey, and I read a lot about this. And so yeah, I'm always nerding out on the latest technology to help athletes achieve their goals with this on a bike or running. Most of my athletes are geared towards running goals, but I think the bike can be a really cool thing to help you with that. So I encourage multi-sport athletes, and I think it's a very important tool to use for injury recovery. And I'll just kind of well, this is actually a related question, so this is something I was going to talk about anyways. But with injuries, right? So I actually think that can be one of the most important times to have a coach. I have had athletes who've gotten injured, or a niggle comes up, and I think there's a lot of oh crap, like I need to tone down things. Maybe I shouldn't. I don't need to be coached right now because I can't do all the things. Actually, I think it's really important to have guidance at that point, with a PT, but also having a coach to guide you through that and your return to run. So I've actually gone through several severe injuries myself, and that's been the time where I've relied on a coach the most. In addition to a PT, but definitely a coach to help guide me to know what's too much, what's not enough, what are kind of good pains to listen to, growing pains, so to speak, or not. But a big piece about that, especially coming back through, it doesn't have to be a severe injury. In my case, it has been. Or surgeries where I'm non-weight bearing and then I have to learn how to walk and then run again. But it can be a very hard time for athletes to deal with motivation, ebbs and flows, and motivation in particular. And I think a coach can actually really help provide a little bit of guidance, but also a reality check that it's normal to have low points in motivation. For me, I think the biggest piece is having someone in your corner that you can turn to and you can rely upon to confide in and say, okay, this is hard and I don't really know what to do. And I think a coach can provide that or steer you in the right direction. I also, with my athletes, after races or in hard moments, right, if it like a race or a training didn't go well, I encourage them to kind of journal about it and to write down things that they can improve upon, or that they want to do better. And I think that can be a really important thing to do when you're not motivated. Almost write about it. And I think I have some different, I always ask some of my athletes to write down mantras and certain things that will help kind of ignite that motivation in the late hours of a race if you're not feeling it. And the same thing can help you through injury moments. But I think one of the most important things is having people in your corner during injuries, and a coach is as a very important piece to help you through that and to guide you through the peaks and valleys, because most oftentimes injury recovery is not linear and you're going to need some help. And I'd like to be that help. So I hope you're not injured, but still, if that happens, and you do have a coach, not to fear. I think that's the place where you want to be. Okay, and kind of going back on the theme of UTMB, like I said, if anyone has been selected into any of those races, I have a lot of experience in that in the Chamonix Valley. Actually, I got my start in sky running, racing on the European and the World Sky Running Series, and that was basically like very steep mountainous terrain, like 50 Ks to that had about 14,000 feet of climbing in them to 100 Ks with around 20,000 feet of climbing in them, 20 to 25,000 feet of climbing. So I really like the mountainous races. You have to prepare for them differently from a training perspective, but also, the mandatory gear, what that looks like, and how you can actually train and use that on training runs. There's a little bit of nuance that's kind of involved in these European mountain races. And so, how does UTMB compare to other European mountain ultras and to US ones? So, generally speaking, in Europe, the terrain is a lot steeper. So, I think if we're comparing kind of from like mountain ultras in general, I like to look at it through let's compare it to the United States. So I think if you have like a sky race, like take Speed Goat 50K, that's been a sky race before, or Run the Rut 50K, something like those races, Broken Arrow Sky Race. Um, those are the big three that that I can think of right now that are kind of very similar in terrain to a European style race. The only difference there is that they're at higher altitude. Usually in Europe, it's a bit lower altitude. So you start at about sea level. In Chamonix, it's about 1,000 feet. And then you kind of climb up from there. So the tallest point on the course in UTMB is about 8,500 feet. Right. So that's very different than a race like Run the Rut or Speed Goat where you're reaching about 12,000 feet. So the difference is altitude, but in terrain, I think not everyone has raced in the Pacific Northwest, but something like that where you're starting at sea level and then you're going up steep terrain. It's usually rooty and rocky. In Colorado, the terrain here is a little bit drier. We still have rocks and steep terrain and steep grades, but generally speaking, the main difference between European racing and US racing is that in US racing, you can be a little bit hard pressed to find a climb bigger than 1,000 meters. That's about 3,000 feet, right? That's a pretty decent climb. Even here in Colorado, the biggest climb that we have here is just, it's about 1,000 meters, about 3,000 feet. In the Pacific Northwest, you can kind of get a 2,000 meter climb or a 5,000 foot, 5,000, 6,000 foot climb in one go. So for UTMB and mountain races in Europe, you have to prepare yourself to be climbing for several hours at a time, and then also for very long descents. So you can, climb for 5,000, 6,000 feet, then you're going to have to be able to descend that as well, and then do another climb and another descent that's similar. So the real main difference between European races and US races is the amount of climbing that you have to do and the amount of descending that you have to do at a certain amount of time. UTMB itself is not very technical. There are much more technical European mountain races that have that same profile of very steep up and very steep down. So some of my athletes that are training for UTMB and they live in the Pacific Northwest, I can prescribe some more specific workouts when we're kind of working with bigger, longer climbs and longer descents in a training run or a long run. You have to get a little bit more creative with it out here, in Colorado and Utah, but there's a lot of things that you can do to help with that. And also, there's a lot of things that you can do even if you don't live on the trails to help to prepare your quads for the downhill and the uphill. So yeah, I think that's kind of some of the main differences. And if you go to my coaching page on the Sharman Ultra Coaching website, there's a list of some of all of the races that I've competed in and that I have experience with. So if you've signed up or want to sign up for any of those races, I have some insider information there to help you. So go ahead and check that out. And it's for me, but also for every coach on the Sharman Ultra coaching team. So it lists which races they've competed in. So I would suggest working with a coach that has experience with the type of races that you would want to run yourself. How do race tactics differ between bike races and running races that I've done? So this is a great question, and it's something that I learned actually. I learned a lot about this past season in 2023, because I was racing exclusively on a bike for the first 6 months of the season. And I actually do think that it helped my running, and I'll tell you why. In a bike race, you can go a lot harder. I remember I've done I did a 1,500-mile bike race this year. I also did a 200-mile bike race unbound this year as well, and I was racing in the pro women. And we start as a group, and we are pushing threshold for the first 90 minutes probably of a 12 to 14 hour race, right? If we did that in a running race, that would be a recipe for disaster. And so the thing is, on a bike, is that because in Kansas it's rolling hills, you can really push on the climbs, and then you can coast, or you can kind of spin it out and actively recover during the race. And especially if you're ingesting enough and you keep your blood glucose levels high enough, you can push in the upper threshold range for a longer period of time compared to running. And the main thing there is just because with running, you still have kind of the pounding that you have to, account for. So you can't really, I wouldn't recommend pushing super hard, pushing threshold for the first 90 minutes of a running race if you have to run for, let's say, a day at a time. But I do think it can help you. It helped me to find, different gears to push in running. So it's like, okay, well, maybe I might not push threshold for 90 minutes of this 100-mile race, but I can be a little bit uncomfortable and know that I have a time to recover. But this is if you eat enough, right? We have to practice that. So racing on the bike, it allowed me to practice that from a nutrition standpoint and what that felt like from an effort standpoint, and to be able to stay on top of it so that I could do that for 10, 12, 14 hours at a time, and then use those tactics for my longer running races. And this is something I personally use in my training. But basically, if I'm going to be a long race, I'll do a morning session, and in the evening I'll have that be a harder session, right? So I learn how to kind of start something a little bit more tired, and learn that I can still push later in the day, if I've been being active all day. So there's different strategies that we can kind of figure out and practice that, whether that's on the bike or running. And it can actually be kind of fun, that you can kind of learn your zone. So the whole point of it is to prevent yourself from bonking, and having to hit that point halfway through a race and just kind of walk it in. We don't want that. So this kind of leads, and I touched on it a little bit, on nutrition tips for mountain ultras. The biggest thing that I've noticed for these European races, or races with a lot of vert, is the need to stay on top of nutrition. And I see another question coming in through is that how do you make sure you recover well enough when you're training hard? The two main things here are eating enough and sleep. And I will also say drinking. I have my big water bottle here. It helps me to remember that I'm drinking enough water throughout the day. But those three things I think are super important. It's nutrition, so making sure that you're eating enough and sleeping enough on very important days. So making sure that you're getting in enough sleep before your long run, before an important workout, and afterwards, right? I think it can be easier to get it depending on how long the run was, but to get sleep after, because you feel tired. But it's really prioritizing those bedtime routines, to make sure that you kind of calm down and rest well before an important session. And I'm going to go into the nutrition a little bit. This is another passion of mine. I have an organic chemistry degree. I was in grad school for biochemistry, and so I've kind of gone down the rabbit hole of looking at biochemistry and nutrition. So these are questions I like to help my athletes think through. But the biggest thing with nutrition is timing your nutrition around your runs or your rides or your training in general. So to say, especially for women, there's a little bit different of a strategy. I would recommend to never be fasted for anything. So it's to start your if you have a session in the morning, making sure that you eat something before to break the fast from sleeping. Then if it's an intense session, to even have a little bit of nutrition, in your water or like a gel during the session. And then to make sure that you have, your recovery shake or a meal or something after your run. So think about this then. Okay, that makes sense if it's in the morning, right? But what happens if it's a weekend, it's a long run? Let's say I start my long run at 10. Okay, so I'm going to have breakfast before. I'm going to bring my nutrition for during the run. Usually we can work with, grams of carbohydrates. For longer slow efforts, anywhere between 40 to 60 grams of carbohydrates, or we just eat something during them. And then let's say you finish your run at like 3 p.m., right? You have a recovery shake, but it's kind of an awkward time to eat. It's like not lunch. You've kind of had lunch on the trails, but it's not quite dinner. So what I say is you time your nutrition around your training. So I would actually recommend having a meal around that time when you're finished with your run. And then, so you're basically kickstarting recovery. And then, okay, well then maybe you've like had a meal and then it's like dinner time is awkward. I wouldn't recommend, having another big full meal. But, listen to your body. If it's still hungry, then maybe you just have like a lighter something around dinner time. But like really trying to get in your nutrition around your training, right? I would not recommend saying, oh, well, I can wait this amount of time until dinner. I think that's the kind of thing that can lead to low energy availability in women, but also in men. And this can lead to injuries. So timing your nutrition around runs can be crucial. And to answer this original question of during long runs, like mountain runs, I do think if you're running, for long periods of times, like to say UTMB, like a long run overnight, making sure you're incorporating real food. And this, I think, foods with protein. If you're running through the night, protein helps with wakefulness. So that can help you feel a little bit more awake. So you don't have to just pound the caffeine for 2 days straight. But really trying to incorporate some sort of real food. My favorite go-to real food during race is rice. It has a higher glycemic index. It kind of sticks with me a little bit longer. And it's something that kind of goes down easily, and I can make it savory or sweet. But yeah, these are things that, we'd have to practice. If you have a late race that starts at, goes through the night, like maybe we practice a little bit of some runs into the night, not missing a whole night of sleep, but running into the night or starting a run a little bit later and seeing how your digestive system, responds to that. There's a lot of different things that we can play around with. So yeah, how do you incorporate strength training into training? So this is something that I do actually year round. I think it's a really important thing for injury prevention and to just, especially for trails, like we want to have muscles and to help us with especially if it's like, a lot of uphill and a lot of downhill. That's kind of more what I'm speaking to for training for these races. I think right now is a really good time. If you have your goal race in the summertime, now is a really good time to work on strength. And that's if you've had injuries in the past, maybe going to get a more thorough, examination from your PT or like get an analysis. We do this at, through Sharman Ultra. We have people that help us with this, that doing gait analysis as well. So you can see if there's anything that we need to work on. I've worked with Renee, who's a partner with Sharman Ultra Coaching, and she's helped a lot of my athletes as well. So even if you don't have someone nearby, you don't know where to go to, we have you covered here. I think it's understanding where your weaknesses are and working on those now. And then, when I think generally speaking, the volume of running is a little bit lighter, We have overall volume maybe with a bit of cross training, but overall running volume is a bit lower. And then as we're ramping up, you kind of, don't lift as heavy or as much as the running volume and training volume increases. I still like to do, some lifting and strength training all throughout the year. But generally, how I do it is I lift heavier and more frequently in the wintertime. And then that kind of shifts to still lifting, but not as heavy as my miles kind of increase and the specificity of for my races increases. Uh, but yeah, it's something that I really enjoy. And there are certain things that you can do on the road, even if you don't have access to, to a gym. Um, yeah, so this is a fun question. So I haven't always been a runner. I was a competitive tennis player in college. I had a scholarship to play in college, and I played pretty competitively at the beginning of grad school. So actually, I think, and this is something that can apply to trail running, even if you don't live by a trail. This is the fact that, like, quick feet. So in tennis, I think that's actually helped me a lot when I went onto trails and why I initially got into sky running. And I like, the more technical mountain trails, because I feel like I have to have quick feet. And in tennis, it's like if you listen to the pros, they're always moving their feet super, super quickly. And I would always do ladder drills and like footwork drills when I was playing tennis competitively. And actually, this is something that you can do and to work on if you're having trouble with technical trails or like coordination. This is something that you can do in the gym. Ladder drills or, running around cones or, picking up your feet. Like literally drills that I have done playing tennis that can help with trail running. And I do really think that helped a lot. Trail running is a little bit interesting because, well, tennis actually is interesting because you have to have a lot of speed, but then matches can last for a long time. So you also have to have endurance. And this is also similar with trail running because you have to have powerful movements if have big rocks and roots and things to hike up, and it can take a lot of strength and power, but you have to be able to do it for long periods of time. So there are some similarities there. And oh yeah, this is another great question too. So what are the most common mistakes runners make training for or racing ultras? So I'll start with the training for ultras. So I think there's a lot of information out there. You can be pretty self-sufficient if you're signing up for a race. You can kind of figure out what to do to train for a race and get to the start line healthy. But I think it's actually pretty wise to get a coach, even though there is a lot of information out there. I think it's a very good idea to have a personalized coach and someone in your corner who's helping you, make the right decisions and train for these races. Because I think the biggest mistake I see is that people do too much. You can train like a pro because the pros do a lot. But there's a story behind every pro athlete and every athlete, and not everyone should be training the same. And so I think the biggest mistake that I see is that people are doing too much, and they come to the race tired. They think, oh well, if it's a overnight race, then I should do my long runs where I'm running overnight. There's several reasons why personally I don't really prescribe that to my athletes, because if you're missing sleep, that can actually that could sacrifice multiple days of quality training than if we started a run that ran into the night and then you stopped and then you still got to bed at a reasonable hour. So I think the biggest mistake I see for training is just doing too much, and that it can either lead to injury and you don't even reach the start line, but then if you do reach the start line, you can kind of just not be motivated for the race itself, which can, I think, be well, that's really hard, because the race is the important thing. The race is supposed to be fun. That's where you're trying to set goals and achieve them. And if you're too tired to actually execute them, it can kind of turn into a sufferfest, and then you might not want to do that race or that style of racing again. And then I think for racing in ultra, And this, I think this can happen if you're maybe not prepared and you don't actually have enough time to have enough guidance to practice these things, of knowing what nutrition works well for you. This can actually be really hard in the later hours of the race. But having those discussions with your coach about what would actually what could work well, what has worked well in the past, for them, or like this is something that you could try, or if you experience this, like there's certain things that you can try. It's ignoring nutrition and hydration early on. You can get into real trouble even in a mountain 50K. If you're running for 5, 6, 7 hours, and you don't pay attention to nutrition for the first 3 hours, that can really hurt your race later on. And then compound that to if you're running for 10, 20, 30 hours. Mistakes with nutrition are really tough. So that's something that with a coach you should be able to practice in racing. And also, I think a big mistake with racing is being unprepared with gear. And that's something that I definitely is nuanced, and definitely it's different than the U.S. races. So even if a lot of my athletes, if they're training for mountain races in the U.S., I always treat it like a European race, and I tell them maybe not to necessarily bring all that gear in their pack, have a few pieces of gear in their pack, but to bring that with them to the aid stations or in their drop bags if they don't have a crew, to be able to use these things if it's just just in case. A race like Run Rabbit Run, for instance, over in Steamboat Springs near me. It's in September, but it can get 90 degrees during the day and freezing at night. And so a lot of runners can be unprepared for those temperature swings. So that would be something. And then the other thing would be not running too hard too early in the race. And this is something that we practice as a coach. I deal a lot with rate of perceived exertion, or if you're working with the heart rate strap, we can do that too. But it's really running your runs easy on your recovery days, and even your long runs, like staying within these certain zones to learn what that all-day pace feels like, because that can get you into trouble later in the race if you don't really know what those efforts feel like. You can start too fast, and then you might have to take a nap during the middle of the race, or you might not be able to finish it if you're just basically if you've used all of your matches, so to speak. So it's not burning too many matches too early, and I think really knowing your goals, like what do you want to accomplish in the race, and executing those, having kind of mini goals throughout the race to be able to accomplish them. So I would say those are the biggest mistakes I've seen. Like racing ultras is tricky, but I also think that's what makes it fun. And if you're racing for many hours at a time, there's a lot of different variables, and I think the biggest thing that you can do with these is to practice problem solving. And no race goes perfectly. It's just how well you can solve the problems as they come up. And I think that's what's a really cool thing about having a coach, is kind of discussing those hypotheticals before it happens. So I think that is all of the questions I had on my end. Unless anyone has any others that they want to put in the chat. But this is gonna live here on this page. So I'll also post it so people can see it, but you can also post questions, and then you can find me over at the Sharman Ultra coaching website if you have any questions, or if you know anyone who got into the UTMB lotteries or any of the big mountain lotteries, and they're looking for a coach and they're not sure, send them this, and so they can see if my coaching style might help them, or if I can help them prepare for a mountain race. There's another And again, the other coaches at Sharman Ultra Coaching too, there's a lot of information on the website. You can see which races that we've done. And yeah, and so from there, yeah, I think we can end it here unless there's any other questions. I'll wait for another another few little seconds here to see if anyone pops anything in there. Um, yeah, but we've got tomorrow, Addie Bracy will be lining up here on the live at 2 p.m. 2 p.m. Mountain Time. So tune in there. She's an amazing coach with Sharman Ultra, amazing runner, and yeah, she'll have some really good tidbits too. And in addition, she does a lot of she's written a book on the mental aspect of ultra running, so can check that out. And I'd ask some good questions there for the mental piece of ultra running. So thanks everyone for tuning in and for the great questions, and hope to see you on the trails. And if not, yeah, shoot us a message over at Sharman Ultra. We hope to work with you and help you with your next trail race goals. Okay, thanks everyone.